The goodbye at the airport was devastating. Ploy had insisted on coming, despite my protests that it would only make things harder. She wore a simple white dress and held my hand as we sat in the departure lounge, both of us trying not to cry. "You have my email," she said as they called my boarding group. "I have your email," I confirmed, though we both knew that emails across continents were poor substitutes for the connection we'd found. "Maybe you can write to me sometime." The kiss goodbye tasted like salt and regret. I forced myself not to look back as I walked toward the gate, but I could feel her watching me leave, and it took every ounce of willpower not to turn around and run back to her. The flight to Manchester was the longest 13 hours of my life. I stared out the window at the clouds below, replaying every moment of the past 2 weeks, trying to figure out what had just happened to me. Had I fallen in love with a woman, or with an idea? Had I found something real, or had I just been another lonely tourist buying into a beautiful illusion? Back in Manchester, the contrast was brutal. The gray skies, the cold wind, the familiar routine of my empty flat, everything felt colorless after the vibrant chaos of Bangkok. I went through the motions of returning to normal life, but normal felt like a prison sentence. I checked my email obsessively, waiting for a message from Ploy. When it finally came 3 days after my return, it was written in clearly translated English, formal and polite. "Dear Tom, I hope you arrive safely to your country. Thank you for wonderful time in Bangkok. I will not forget you. Please take care yourself. Ploy." I read it a dozen times, analyzing every word for hidden meaning. Was this a goodbye, or an invitation to stay in touch? I spent an hour crafting my response, trying to strike the right tone, not too desperate, not too casual, leaving the door open without being presumptuous. What followed was the strangest long-distance relationship of my life. We exchanged emails every few days, hers gradually becoming less formal as she gained confidence with English. She told me about her daily life, working at the bar, sending money to her family, studying English with online tutorials. I told her about my work, my slowly progressing divorce, my growing dissatisfaction with everything about my old life. After about a month, I worked up the courage to include my phone number in an email. She responded immediately with hers, and we started texting through WhatsApp. The immediacy of messaging made everything feel more real, more connected. I'd wake up in Manchester to find good morning messages from Bangkok, and I'd fall asleep sending goodnight texts that she'd read over her morning coffee. The time difference became a metaphor for everything that separated us. When I was starting my day, she was ending hers. When I was dealing with spreadsheets and office politics, she was getting ready for another night at the bar. We existed in parallel worlds that occasionally overlapped in our phone screens. "I miss you," she texted one night, and those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. "I miss you too," I replied, and realized I meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. My friends and family started noticing changes in me. I was distracted at work, constantly checking my phone, uninterested in the social activities I'd usually engaged in. My mom asked if I was seeing someone new, and I didn't know how to answer. Was I seeing someone? Could you be in a relationship with someone on the other side of the world whom you'd known for 2 weeks? "You're not the same since you got back from Thailand," Danny said during one of our Skype calls. "You seem, I don't know, restless?" He was right. Thailand had spoiled me for normal life. Every day in Manchester felt like I was marking time, waiting for something to change. I started researching teaching English as a foreign language, looking into visa requirements for Thailand, calculating how much money I'd need to make a move. But making plans felt like admitting that this wasn't just a holiday romance, that I was seriously considering upending my entire life for a woman I'd known for 2 weeks. The rational part of my brain kept reminding me how crazy that sounded, how many ways it could go wrong. 3 months after my return, Ploy sent me a message that changed everything. "I quit bar. Find new job in hotel. Clean, but less money. I think about you every day and want to be better person." I stared at that message for a long time, understanding the significance of what she was telling me. She'd given up the easy money of bar work, work that I knew she didn't enjoy, but had been doing out of necessity. She was trying to build a different life, maybe hoping that I'd be part of it. That night, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day researching flights to Bangkok. Not for a holiday this time, for something more permanent. I looked into apartment rentals, job opportunities, the practicalities of actually moving to Thailand. By evening, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I was going back to Bangkok, not for a visit, but to build a life there, with Ploy if she'd have me, without her, if that's how it worked out. But either way, I was done with the half-life I'd been living in Manchester. The hardest part was telling my family. My parents were convinced I was having a breakdown, making decisions based on loneliness and midlife crisis rather than rational thought. My sister was more understanding, but worried about the practicalities. What would I do for work? What if it didn't work out? What if Ploy was just using me? I know it sounds crazy, I told them, but staying here feels crazier. I've never been happier than I was in Bangkok, and I've never felt more connected to another person than I do with Ploy. If that's not worth taking a risk for, then what is? Quitting my job was easier than I expected. The economy was tough, they needed to cut costs anyway, and my resignation saved them from having to make redundancies. I sold my furniture, gave notice on my flat, and booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok. The plan was simple. I'd saved enough money to live modestly in Thailand for about a year while I figured out work options. I'd found a small apartment in the same area where Danny lived, and I'd contacted a few English schools about teaching opportunities. Beyond that, I was flying blind, trusting that things would work out somehow. I hadn't told Ploy I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise, but more than that, I wanted to know that my decision was about more than just her. If I was going to rebuild my life in Thailand, it had to be because I genuinely wanted to live there, not just because I was chasing a relationship. The flight to Bangkok felt completely different from my previous trips. This time, I wasn't a tourist with a return ticket and a planned itinerary. I was an immigrant, carrying everything I owned in 2 suitcases, with no idea what came next. Danny met me at the airport again, but this time his expression was pure concern mixed with admiration. "You actually did it," he said as we loaded my life into a taxi. "You crazy bastard. You actually did it." "Yeah," I said, watching Bangkok's skyline approach through the windshield. "I actually did it." The first few days were a blur of practical arrangements, setting up a bank account, registering with immigration, buying basic necessities for my tiny apartment. Bangkok felt different as a resident than as a tourist. The chaos was the same, but now I was part of it, rather than just observing it. I waited a week before contacting Ploy, partly to get settled, but mostly because I was terrified. What if she'd moved on? What if our connection had been just a holiday romance that couldn't survive in the real world? What if I'd upended my entire life for something that existed only in my imagination? When I finally called her, her voice was a mixture of shock and joy. "Tom, you in Thailand again?" "I'm in Bangkok," I said. "I moved here. I live here now." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the connection had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You move here? For real?" "For real." We met that evening at the same rooftop bar where we'd had our first proper conversation. She looked exactly the same, but somehow different. More confident, more settled. The hotel job suited her, she said. The pay was less than bar work, but she felt more respected, more like she was building a career rather than just surviving. "I cannot believe you here," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand like she needed to confirm I was real. "I can't believe it either," I admitted. 6 months ago, I was married and living in Manchester. Now I'm single and living in Bangkok. Life is weird. "You sure about this? About being here?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself constantly. "I'm sure about wanting to try," I said. "I'm sure that I was dying slowly in England, and I feel alive here. Everything else we'll figure out as we go." What followed was the most intense, complicated, wonderful 6 months of my life. Living in Bangkok as a resident was completely different from visiting as a tourist. There were visa runs to Cambodia, bureaucratic nightmares with work permits, the daily challenges of navigating a culture and language I barely understood. But there was also the joy of building something real with Ploy. We took Thai lessons together, explored parts of the country I'd never seen, slowly created a shared life that felt authentic rather than transactional. She moved in with me after 3 months, and suddenly my tiny apartment felt like home in a way my Manchester flat never had. The work situation sorted itself out gradually. I started teaching English at a language school in Sukhumvit, which provided a visa and enough income to live comfortably by Thai standards. The pay was a fraction of what I'd earned in Manchester, but money went much further here, and more importantly, I actually enjoyed the work. Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find who you really are. That quote hit me like a freight train as I sat in my empty Manchester flat, staring at the divorce papers scattered across my coffee table. 6 months earlier, I thought I had it all figured out: stable job, comfortable marriage, predictable life. Now, here I was, 34 years old, feeling like I'd wasted the last decade of my life on autopilot. The marriage had been dying a slow death for years, but neither Sarah nor I had the courage to admit it until the silence between us became unbearable. We'd become strangers, sharing a mortgage, going through the motions of a relationship that had flatlined somewhere around year 3. The final blow came when I found her texting her personal trainer at 2 a.m., and honestly, I wasn't even angry. I was relieved someone else was dealing with her emotional needs. But divorce, even an amicable one, leaves you questioning everything. Who am I without the safety net of marriage? What do I actually want from life? These questions haunted me during those long winter nights, nursing cheap whiskey and scrolling through social media, watching everyone else live their seemingly perfect lives. That's when my old university mate Danny called from Bangkok. "Mate, you sound like death warmed over," he said after I'd spent 20 minutes moaning about my situation. Danny had been living in Thailand for 3 years, teaching English and living what he called the dream life: cheap beer, great food, and endless adventures. "I need to get out of this place," I admitted. "Everything here reminds me of what I've lost." "Then don't think about it," Danny said. "Book a flight. Come to Bangkok. I'll show you what living actually feels like." Within 48 hours, I'd booked a 2-week trip to Thailand. I'd never been to Asia before. Hell, I'd barely been outside Europe. But something about the spontaneity felt right. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of excitement. The flight to Bangkok was brutal, 13 hours of cramped seats and airline food. But as we descended through the clouds and I saw the sprawling metropolis below, my heart started racing. This was it. This was my escape from the mundane. Danny met me at Suvarnabhumi Airport, grinning ear to ear. He looked different, tanned, relaxed, like he'd shed years of stress. We grabbed a taxi to his apartment in Thonglor, and as we weaved through the chaotic Bangkok traffic, he started laying out the plan. "First rule of Bangkok," he said, lighting up a cigarette despite the no smoking sign in the taxi. "Forget everything you think you know about nightlife. This place will blow your mind." I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. I'd been to Ibiza, Amsterdam, Prague. I thought I knew what a good night out looked like. I had no idea how wrong I was. That first evening, we started slow. Danny took me to a rooftop bar in Sukhumvit, where we drank overpriced cocktails and watched the sunset paint the Bangkok skyline in brilliant oranges and purples. The city stretched out endlessly in every direction, a maze of skyscrapers, temples, and bustling streets that seemed to pulse with energy. "So, what's the real story with you and Sarah?" Danny asked, as we nursed our second round of drinks. I gave him the sanitized version. Grew apart, wanted different things, amicable split. But the truth was messier. The truth was that I'd been sleepwalking through life, accepting mediocrity because it was safe. Sarah had been doing the same thing, and together we'd created this bubble of boring domesticity that slowly suffocated both of us. "You know what your problem is," Danny said, stubbing out his cigarette. "You've been living other people's expectations instead of your own. When's the last time you did something that actually excited you?" I couldn't answer that question, which was answer enough. "Well, that changes tonight," he said with a grin that made me both excited and terrified. We started at Nana Plaza around 10 p.m. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw there. The plaza was a neon wonderland, 3 floors of bars packed with the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. Music pounded from every direction, girls in bikinis danced on stages, and the air was thick with anticipation and possibilities. "Just remember," Danny said as we walked through the maze of bars, "this is all about having fun. Don't overthink it, don't get too attached, and definitely don't fall in love." I laughed off his warning, but as we made our way through bar after bar, I started to understand what he meant. These weren't just bars, they were fantasy factories, designed to make every man feel like the most important person in the world. The girls were stunning, sure, but more than that, they were attentive, funny, and genuinely seemed interested in talking to us. At a place called Classroom, we sat at the bar watching the stage show. The girls were performing elaborate dance routines, some more artistic than others, but all mesmerizing in their own way. The whole scene was so far removed from anything I'd experienced back home that I felt like I'd stepped into another dimension. "You fancy anyone?" Danny asked, nudging me as a particularly stunning girl with long black hair and a killer smile caught my eye. Before I could answer, she'd finished her set and was walking over to us. Her name was Ploy, and she spoke better English than half the people I worked with back in Manchester. We chatted for hours about her life, my divorce, Bangkok, everything and nothing. She was studying business at university during the day and working at the bar at night to pay for her education. "You seem sad," she said at one point, studying my face with those dark eyes, "like you're running from something." She wasn't wrong. I was running. From my failed marriage, from my boring job, from a life that had felt like a prison sentence. But sitting there talking to this beautiful, intelligent woman in a Bangkok go-go bar, I felt more alive than I had in years. When the bar closed at 2 a.m., Ploy asked if I wanted to continue the conversation somewhere else. Danny shot me a look that said, "Remember what I told you," but I was already beyond caring about warnings. For the first time in months, I wanted something badly enough to take a risk. We went back to my hotel in Sukhumvit, and what happened next was unlike anything I'd experienced in my marriage. It wasn't just physical, though that was incredible. It was emotional, spiritual even. We talked until sunrise, her head on my chest, sharing stories about our dreams, our fears, our plans for the future. When she left the next morning, I gave her some money without her asking for it. It felt like the right thing to do, not transactional but appreciative. She kissed me goodbye and said she hoped she'd see me again before I left Thailand. "Did you have fun?" Danny asked when I met him for breakfast, grinning at my obvious exhaustion. "That was," I started, then stopped. How do you explain that a night with a go-go dancer had made you feel more connected to another human being than 3 years of marriage? "I told you this place was different," Danny said. "But remember what I said about not getting attached." The warning felt hollow now. I was already attached, and we both knew it. But I tried to push those feelings aside and focus on exploring Bangkok. Danny had a whole itinerary planned for the next few days, and I threw myself into tourist mode with desperate determination. We spent the next morning at the Grand Palace, wandering through the maze of golden temples and ornate buildings. The craftsmanship was incredible, every surface covered in intricate details, colorful mosaics and gleaming statues of Buddha. Tourists shuffled around in respectful silence, cameras clicking constantly, but I found myself distracted, checking my phone every few minutes. "She's not going to text you, mate," Danny said as we sat in the shade of an ancient tree, sharing a bottle of water. "That's not how this works." "I know," I lied. "I'm just adjusting to the time difference." Danny gave me a look that said he wasn't buying it, but he let it slide. We spent the afternoon at Wat Pho, home of the massive reclining Buddha. then wandered through Chinatown as the sun started to set. The streets were chaos, vendors hawking everything from fake Rolex watches to grilled insects, tuk-tuks weaving through traffic with reckless abandon. The air thick with the smell of street food and exhaust fumes. "This is the real Bangkok," Danny said as we squeezed through a narrow alley packed with food stalls. "Not the sanitized tourist version, not the go-go bar fantasy. This is where actual people live and work." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the real Bangkok for me was somewhere else entirely. We grabbed dinner at a hole-in-the-wall restaurant where the menu was entirely in Thai and the owner spoke 3 words of English. The food was incredible. That grilled fish that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Grilled fish that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Sticky rice that somehow made everything better. "You're thinking about her again," Danny observed as we walked back towards Sukhumvit. "Am I that obvious? You've barely said 10 words since lunch, and you keep staring at your phone like it's going to spontaneously combust." I laughed, despite myself. "Sorry, mate. I know this isn't why you invited me here." "Actually, it kind of is," Danny said, lighting up a cigarette as we waited for the BTS train. "You were dead inside when you called me from Manchester. Yeah, I brought you here to have some fun and forget about Sarah, but mostly I brought you here to remember what it feels like to want something again." The train arrived, packed with commuters heading home from work. We squeezed into a corner, swaying with the motion as Bangkok flashed by outside the windows. Office workers in pressed shirts, university students with backpacks, elderly women carrying bags of groceries, all of them living their lives, pursuing their own versions of happiness. "The question is," Danny continued as we found seats, "what are you going to do about it?" That night we hit Soy Cowboy, and I tried my best to focus on the experience. The Soy was smaller than Nana Plaza, but more intimate, with bars spilling out onto the narrow street. Neon signs advertised everything from beautiful girls to ping-pong shows, and the energy was electric. We started at a place called Baccara, where the girls wore elaborate costumes and performed choreographed dance numbers. The production value was impressive: professional lighting, quality sound system, dancers who clearly had some training. It felt more like a cabaret show than a strip club. "This is actually pretty artistic," I said to Danny as we watched a girl in a traditional Thai costume perform what looked like a classical dance. "Wait until you see the ping-pong show," he replied with a grin. We moved on to Tilak Bar, then Long Gun, each place with its own personality and cast of characters. The girls were friendly, some more aggressive than others in trying to get us to buy lady drinks, but all of them seemed genuinely happy to chat. I found myself comparing everyone to Ploy. This one was prettier, that one was funnier, but none of them had that spark that had knocked me sideways the night before. At Crazy House, things got wild. The ping-pong show was exactly what it sounded like, a demonstration of anatomical dexterity that defied both physics and good taste. The crowd was mostly middle-aged tourists who cheered and whooped like they were at a football match. It was simultaneously hilarious and slightly disturbing. "First time?" asked the Australian guy sitting next to us, noticing my wide-eyed expression. "Is it that obvious?" "You get used to it," he said with a laugh. "I've been coming here for 15 years. My wife thinks I'm on business trips." Something about that comment hit me wrong. This guy was cheating on his wife, lying to her, using these girls as some kind of escape from his real life. Was that what I was doing? Was I just another middle-aged divorced guy running away from his problems? "You all right?" Danny asked as we left Crazy House. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just thinking," I said, "about what I'm doing here, what this all means." "Mate, you're overthinking it. You're on holiday, you're having fun. Sarah is back in Manchester, probably shagging her personal trainer. And you're in Bangkok, discovering that life has more to offer than Sunday roasts and BBC programming. There's nothing wrong with that." He had a point, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than just a holiday fling. The connection I'd felt with Ploy wasn't just physical attraction or exotic novelty. It was something deeper. Something I'd never experienced in my marriage or any other relationship. We ended the night at a regular bar on Sukhumvit Road, the kind of place where expats went to drink cheap beer and complain about their home countries. The conversation inevitably turned to women, relationships, and the eternal question of East versus West. Thai women are just different, explained a British guy who'd been living in Bangkok for 5 years. They're more feminine, more caring. Western women have forgotten how to be women, if you know what I mean. I found his generalizations annoying, but I understood what he was getting at. There was something different about the women I'd met here, but I didn't think it was about being more or less feminine. It was about approach, about the way they engaged with the world and with men. Less aggressive, more intuitive, focused on harmony rather than conflict. Plus, they actually appreciate what you do for them, added an American who was clearly several drinks past his limit. Back home, you buy a woman dinner and she acts like you're trying to buy her. Here, they're grateful, they show affection. It's refreshing. The conversation was making me uncomfortable, reducing complex human beings to stereotypes and cultural generalizations. But underneath the crude analysis, there was something I recognized. These men were all searching for connection, for appreciation, for someone who made them feel valued. The same thing I was searching for, really. The next day was my last full day in Bangkok, and Danny had planned a cultural excursion to balance out all the nightlife. We took a long tailboat through the klongs that wind through the city, past floating markets and traditional wooden houses on stilts. It was like stepping back in time. Vendors paddling their boats full of fruits and vegetables, children jumping off docks into the murky water, elderly women washing clothes by hand. This is how Bangkok used to be, Danny explained as our boat puttered along the narrow waterways. Before the skyscrapers and shopping malls, it was all canals and floating communities. The contrast was striking. Less than a mile away, Bangkok's modern skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun. But here in the klongs, life moved at a different pace. Slower, more connected to nature and tradition. It felt more authentic than the touristy temples or the neon-lit entertainment districts. We visited Wat Arun, the Temple of Dawn, climbing the steep steps to get a panoramic view of the Chao Phraya River. From up there, Bangkok spread out in all directions, a sprawling metropolis of contrasts and contradictions. Ancient and modern, sacred and profane, beautiful and chaotic. "You're going to miss this place," Danny said as we sat at the top of the temple, watching longtail boats navigate the river below. "Yeah," I agreed. "More than I expected." "You know, you could always come back," he said casually. "I mean, what's really keeping you in Manchester? The job you hate? The flat that's too big for one person? The memories of a marriage that died years ago?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about too directly. What was keeping me in Manchester? Habit, mostly. Fear of change. The comfort of the familiar, even when the familiar was slowly killing my soul. That evening, for my last night, Danny suggested we go back to Nana Plaza. "Might as well end where we started," he said. I agreed, but not for the reasons he thought. I wanted to see Ploy again, to say goodbye properly, to figure out if what I'd felt was real or just holiday magic. We made our way back to classroom, and my heart was pounding as we walked up the stairs. She was there, on stage with 3 other girls, performing a dance routine to a popular Thai song. When she spotted me in the crowd, her face lit up, and she gave me a little wave that made my chest tight. After her set, she came over immediately, not even bothering to change out of her costume. "You came back," she said, sitting down next to me and taking my hand. "I said I would," I replied. We talked for hours, using a mixture of her broken English, my non-existent Thai, and Google Translate. She told me about her family, parents who owned a small farm in Isan, a younger brother who was studying engineering, dreams of opening her own business someday. I told her about my divorce, my job, my feeling of being stuck in a life that didn't fit anymore. "You seem different tonight," she said at one point. "Sad." "I have to go back to England tomorrow," I explained. She nodded, but I could see something change in her expression. A wall going up, perhaps, or just the recognition that whatever this was between us had an expiration date. When the bar closed, she asked if I wanted to spend my last night together. Of course I did. But this time the experience was different. More intense, more desperate. Like we were both trying to memorize every moment before it slipped away. Lying in bed afterward, her head on my chest, I felt a profound sadness settling over me. In less than 12 hours, I'd be on a plane back to Manchester, back to my old life, and this would all become just a memory, a story I'd tell at dinner parties, if I ever went to dinner parties again. I wish things were different, I said quietly. Different how? She asked. I wish I lived here. I wish I could see you again. She was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on my chest with her finger. Maybe you come back someday, she said finally. Maybe, I agreed, but we both knew it was just something people say. The goodbye at the airport was brutal. Danny drove me, and we barely spoke during the hour-long journey. What was there to say? I was going back to my old life, and he was staying in paradise. Ploy had wanted to come see me off, but I'd told her not to. Airport goodbyes are hard enough without adding that level of emotional complexity. Take care of yourself, mate, Danny said as we stood outside the departure terminal. And remember, you're not the same person who arrived here 2 weeks ago. Don't let Manchester make you forget that. The flight back was torture. 13 hours to think about what I was leaving behind, what I was returning to, what my life was going to look like now that I'd tasted something different. The woman sitting next to me was reading a romance novel, and I found myself envious of fictional characters who got their happy endings. Manchester greeted me with gray skies and drizzle, which felt appropriate. My flat looked smaller and drabber than I remembered, filled with the ghosts of my failed marriage and my boring routine. I unpacked mechanically, putting my Thai souvenirs on shelves where they looked foreign and out of place. The next Monday, I was back at my desk, staring at spreadsheets and attending meetings about quarterly projections. My colleagues asked about my trip, and I gave them the sanitized version. Beautiful temples, great food, interesting culture. I didn't mention the go-go bars or the girl who had turned my world upside down in the space of 2 weeks. But I couldn't stop thinking about her, about Bangkok, about the way I'd felt there, alive, excited, like I was finally living, instead of just existing. I'd check my phone constantly, hoping for a message that never came. I'd find myself Googling flights back to Bangkok, calculating how much money I had saved, how long I could make it last. 3 weeks passed like this. 3 weeks of gray English weather, boring work, and nights spent alone in my flat, watching Netflix and wondering what Ploy was doing. Was she thinking about me? Had she moved on to the next customer, the next lonely foreign man looking for connection? Then, something snapped. I was sitting in a meeting about optimizing workflow processes, listening to my boss drone on about efficiency metrics, when I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't pretend that this life was enough, that I should be grateful for stability and a steady paycheck, when everything inside me was screaming for something more. I walked out of the meeting, literally just stood up and walked out, leaving my confused colleagues staring after me. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and booked a flight back to Bangkok. One way this time. My boss called me into his office an hour later, clearly furious about my disruption of the meeting. I listened to his lecture about professionalism and commitment, and then I handed him my resignation letter. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The economy is tough right now. Jobs like this don't grow on trees." "You're right," I agreed. "I am making a mistake. I'm making the best mistake of my life." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of selling furniture, canceling utilities, and explaining to confused friends and family why I was moving to Thailand. My mother was convinced I was having a nervous breakdown. My father thought I was throwing my life away for some foreign woman who was probably just after my money. "You don't understand," I tried to explain to them. I was dying there. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. For the first time in years, I feel like I have something to live for. They didn't understand, and I couldn't blame them. From the outside, it looked like madness, giving up everything for a woman I'd known for a few days in a country I'd visited once. But from the inside, it felt like the first sane decision I'd made in years. Danny was waiting for me at Suvarnabhumi Airport with that same grin, but this time it was mixed with concern. "You sure about this, mate?" he asked as we loaded my life into the back of a taxi. "Moving to Thailand for a bar girl you've known for a week. It's not exactly a recipe for success." "I'm not moving here for a bar girl," I said. "I'm moving here for me, for the person I am when I'm here. She's just part of that." We drove through Bangkok traffic toward my new life, and with every kilometer, I felt the weight of my old existence lifting off my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I was finally moving towards something, instead of running away. I'd arranged to meet Ploy that same evening, my second night in Bangkok, but this time I wanted to take her somewhere different, away from the bars and the noise. Danny suggested a rooftop restaurant in Siloam, where we could actually talk without shouting over thumping music. She looked different in regular clothes. Younger, more vulnerable, but somehow more real. We spent 3 hours over dinner using Google Translate to bridge the language gap, laughing at the ridiculous translations it sometimes produced. She told me about her dreams of opening a small restaurant, about missing her family in the countryside, about feeling trapped between the life she wanted and the life she needed to survive. "Why you come Thailand?" she asked at one point, her English careful and deliberate. I tried to explain about the divorce, about feeling lost, about needing to escape, but the deeper truth was harder to articulate, that I'd been sleepwalking through life for years, and Bangkok had woken me up. "You seem like good man," she said. "But sad, like something break inside." She wasn't wrong. Something had broken inside me. My faith in the life I'd been living, my belief that security and routine were enough. But sitting there with her, watching the Bangkok skyline glitter below us, I felt something else stirring. Hope, maybe. Possibility. The night ended at my hotel again, but this time felt different, less desperate, more tender. We fell asleep talking, her English mixing with my fumbling attempts at Thai, creating our own private language of gestures and broken phrases. Over the next few days, I found myself living a double life. During the day, I'd play tourist with Danny, visiting temples, exploring markets, taking boat rides through the floating markets outside the city. But every evening, I'd meet Ploy, and we'd create our own version of Bangkok together. She showed me parts of the city I never would have found otherwise. Night markets where locals ate, tiny bars hidden in apartment buildings, street food stalls where she'd order for me in rapid Thai while I stood there grinning like an idiot. These weren't tourist experiences, they were glimpses into real life, the Bangkok that existed beyond the guidebooks and travel blogs. "You different from other customers?" she told me one night, as we shared som tam from a roadside vendor. "Different how?" "You want to know me, not just body. You ask about family, about dreams. Other men, they just want fantasy." That comment stuck with me. Was I different, or was I just telling myself I was different to make this whole situation feel less tawdry? The line between customer and genuine connection was blurrier than I wanted to admit. Danny noticed the change in me, and he wasn't entirely happy about it. "Mate, you're spending every night with the same girl," he said one afternoon as we rode the BTS to Chatuchak Market. "That's not really experiencing Thailand, is it?" "Maybe my Thailand is different from yours," I replied. "Look, I get it. She's beautiful, she's sweet, and she makes you feel special. But you're leaving in 4 days. What's your exit strategy here?" I didn't have one, and we both knew it. I was falling hard for a woman whose life was completely foreign to me, in a situation that had no obvious resolution. The smart thing would be to enjoy the remaining time and then walk away cleanly. But nothing about my feelings for Ploy felt smart or logical. That weekend, she had 2 days off from the bar, and she offered to show me the real Thailand outside Bangkok. We took a bus to Ayutthaya, the ancient capital, where massive temple ruins dotted the landscape like broken teeth. Walking through those ancient stones, Ploy transformed into a tour guide, explaining the history in her careful English, pointing out details I never would have noticed. "My grandmother bring me here when I small," she said, as we sat in the shade of a 500-year-old Buddha statue. "She tell me stories about kings and queens, about when Thailand was strong." "What happened to your grandmother?" "She died 2 years ago, before I start work in bar." Her voice got quiet. "She would not like what I do now." "Why do you do it?" She was quiet for a long moment, picking at the grass beside her. "You have choice in your country. Good job, education, family help. Here, if you come from poor family, you have maybe 2 choice. Work in factory for small money or work in bar for big money. I choose big money so I can help family, maybe save for future." It was the most honest conversation we'd had, and it made me realize how little I actually understood about her world. I'd been romanticizing this whole experience, turning it into some kind of exotic love story, but the reality was more complex. She was making difficult choices to survive in a system that offered limited options. That night, we stayed in small guest house in Ayutthaya, and for the first time it felt like we were just a couple on a romantic getaway. No money changed hands, no transaction was implied. We were just 2 people who'd found something special together, even if that something had an expiration date attached. "I wish I could stay," I told her as we lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the ancient city settling into sleep. "I wish too," she said quietly. "But you have life in England. I have life here. Different worlds." The next day we took the train back to Bangkok, and reality started creeping back in. I had 2 days left before my flight home, and we both knew this fairy tale was about to end. The mood between us shifted, became more intense, like we were trying to pack a lifetime of experiences into our remaining hours. On my last night, instead of going to the bar, Ploy asked if we could just stay in my hotel room and order room service. "I want to remember you this way," she said. "Not in bar, not with other people, just us." We talked all night, using every translation app on my phone to communicate the things we couldn't say in our shared vocabulary. She told me about her childhood on the farm, about the brother she was putting through university, about her dreams of traveling to Europe someday. I told her about my marriage, about feeling trapped in a life that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow on the inside. "Maybe in different life we meet different way," she said, as dawn began to filter through the curtains. "Maybe in this life," I said, but neither of us believed it. On my second to last night, I convinced Danny to go back to Nana Plaza, specifically to classroom. I told myself I just wanted to see if the magic I'd felt that first night was real, or just a product of my emotional state and too much alcohol. Ploy was there, and the smile that lit up her face when she saw me told me everything I needed to know. The connection was real, at least for me. We spent another incredible night together, but this time, when morning came, the goodbye felt different. Heavier. Final. "I wish you didn't have to go," she said as we shared coffee in my hotel room. "I wish I didn't have to either," I replied, and I meant it. But I did have to go. I had a life back in Manchester, a job, responsibilities. This was just a holiday, just a way to get my confidence back after the divorce. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I packed my bags and prepared to return to reality. The flight back to Manchester was torture. 13 hours to think about what I was leaving behind, what I was going back to. As the plane descended through the gray English clouds, I felt my temporary happiness evaporating like morning mist. Back in my flat, surrounded by the detritus of my failed marriage, I tried to settle back into my old routine. But everything felt different now. The job that had seemed acceptable before now felt soul-crushing. The city that had been home for over a decade now felt like a prison. I'd tasted freedom, adventure, genuine connection, and now I was expected to forget about it and get on with my real life. I lasted exactly 3 weeks. Danny wasn't surprised when I called him at 3 a.m. Manchester time to tell him I was coming back to Bangkok, this time for good. "I wondered how long it would take," he said with a laugh. Thailand has a way of getting under your skin. It's not just Thailand, I admitted. It's her, it's Ploy. I can't stop thinking about her. Mate, you sure about this? You're talking about upending your entire life for a girl you've known for 2 weeks. I'm talking about upending my entire life for the first time I've felt truly alive in years, I corrected him. Within a month, I'd quit my job, sold most of my belongings, and booked a one-way ticket back to Bangkok. My family thought I'd lost my mind. My friends said I was having a midlife crisis. Maybe they were right, but I didn't care. For the first time in my adult life, I was following my heart instead of my head. The second arrival in Bangkok felt completely different from the first. This wasn't a tourist coming for a holiday. This was a man coming home. Danny met me at the airport again, but this time he was shaking his head instead of grinning. "You're either the bravest man I know or the most foolish," he said as we loaded my life into the back of a taxi. "Probably both," I admitted. I'd arranged to meet Ploy at the same rooftop bar where Danny and I had shared drinks on my first night. I was nervous as hell. What if she didn't remember me the same way I remembered her? What if the connection had been one-sided? What if she was seeing someone else? But when she walked in and saw me sitting there, her face lit up with the same smile that had stopped my heart the first time I saw it. She ran over and threw her arms around me, and in that moment, I knew I'd made the right decision. "You came back," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I never really left," I replied. "That was 2 years ago. Today, I'm writing this from our apartment in Thong Lor, where Ploy's in the kitchen making pad Thai and singing along to Thai pop music. She's no longer working at the bar. She finished her business degree and now works for a marketing company in the city center. I've started a small consulting business, helping Western companies navigate the Thai market. It hasn't all been smooth sailing. There were cultural barriers to overcome, language challenges, moments of doubt on both sides. My family back home still doesn't entirely understand my choice, and some of Ploy's friends were skeptical of my motives. But love, real love, finds a way to work through those obstacles. Looking back, I realized that my divorce wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to discover what I actually needed. It took a leap of faith into the unknown to find the life I was meant to live. Danny was wrong about one thing. Sometimes falling in love is exactly what you need to do, even if it means turning your entire world upside down. Especially then. The quote that started this whole journey, "Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find who you really are," has become my personal mantra. I lost the man I thought I was supposed to be and found the man I actually am. I lost a safe, predictable life and found an adventure that continues to unfold every single day. Bangkok changed me in ways I never expected. It taught me that happiness isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's about having the courage to pursue what sets your soul on fire. It showed me that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. If you're reading this and feeling stuck in your own life, wondering if there's something more out there waiting for you, I want you to know that there is. It might not be in Bangkok, and it might not involve a go-go dancer with a killer smile, but there's a life out there that's authentically yours, waiting for you to be brave enough to claim it. The hardest part isn't taking that first step. It's believing you deserve to be truly happy. But you do. We all do. And sometimes it takes losing everything to realize that the life you're meant to live is nothing like the one you've been settling for. Ploy just called me to dinner, and I can smell the pad Thai from here. This is my life now. Messy, unexpected, absolutely perfect in its imperfection, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. 3 years later, the phone rang at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me awake from dreams of Manchester rain. It was my mother, calling from England with news that would test everything I'd built here in Bangkok. "Your father's had a heart attack," she said, her voice small and scared. "He's stable, but, Tom, I think you should come home." I looked over at Ploy, who was already awake, her dark eyes full of concern even though she couldn't understand the rapid English on the other end of the line. In 3 years together, we'd weathered visa runs, business struggles, cultural misunderstandings, and the occasional bout of homesickness. But this was different. This was the call I'd been dreading since I'd chosen Bangkok over Britain. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough," Mum replied. "The doctors say he needs surgery, but at his age, Tom, he's been asking for you." After I hung up, Ploy took my hand and waited for me to explain. Her English had improved dramatically over the years, but I still found myself switching to the basic vocabulary we'd used in those early days, when the emotions were too big for complex language. "My father is sick," I said. "Very sick. I need to go to England." She nodded, understanding immediately what this meant. We'd talked about this scenario before, the inevitable pull of family obligations, the weight of being an only child with aging parents. She'd always known that someday I might have to choose between the life we'd built and the responsibilities I'd left behind. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe weeks, maybe longer." That afternoon, I was on a plane to Manchester, leaving behind the humid chaos of Bangkok for the familiar grey of northern England. The flight gave me 13 hours to think about how much had changed since that first desperate escape from my failing marriage. My father looked smaller in the hospital bed, older and more fragile than I remembered. The heart attack had taken something out of him, some essential spark that I'd never noticed until it was dimmed. My mother had aged too, worry lines etched deeper around her eyes. "You came," Dad said when he saw me, his voice weak but relieved. "Of course I came. I wasn't sure. Thought maybe Thailand had become more important than your old man." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself during the long flight. Had I become so caught up in my new life that I'd forgotten my old responsibilities? The son who'd moved halfway around the world for a woman he'd met in a go-go bar wasn't exactly the reliable family man my parents had raised. The surgery went well, but recovery was slow. Days stretched into weeks as I shuttled between the hospital and my parents' house, handling the practical matters they could no longer manage themselves. Bills, groceries, medications, doctor's appointments, all the mundane details of life that suddenly felt monumentally important. Meanwhile, Ploy and I talked every day on WhatsApp, the time difference making our conversations feel fragmented and urgent. She told me about work, about the restaurant she was planning to open with her savings, about missing me. I told her about Dad's progress, about the gray Manchester weather, about feeling torn between two worlds. "You need to stay," she said during one late-night call. "Family is important, more important than anything. What about us? What about our plans? Plans can change. Hearts don't break from waiting." But I could hear something in her voice, a resignation that scared me more than any argument would have. She was already preparing herself for the possibility that I might not come back, that duty would triumph over love, just like it had for so many expat relationships before ours. After 6 weeks in Manchester, Dad was finally stable enough to go home. But he wasn't the same man he'd been before the heart attack. He needed help with basic tasks, constant monitoring, someone to make sure he took his medications and attended his follow-up appointments. My mother, at 68, was struggling to manage it all. "You could stay," she said one evening as we sat in their small living room, watching the BBC News. "Get a job here. Be close to us. We're not getting any younger, Tom." It was the conversation I'd been dreading, the one that would force me to choose between the son I'd been and the man I'd become. In the old days, before Bangkok, before Ploy, before I'd learned what it felt like to truly live, the choice would have been obvious. Duty, responsibility, the comfort of familiar expectations. But as I sat in that cramped living room, surrounded by the accumulated possessions of my parents' long marriage, I felt like I was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, the future stretching out in predictable shades of gray. This was the life I'd escaped from, the prison of other people's needs and expectations. "I can't," I said finally. "I'm sorry, but I can't stay." The hurt in my mother's eyes was immediate and sharp. "So that girl is more important than your own family?" It's not about Ploy, I tried to explain. It's about who I am when I'm there. I was dying here, Mum. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. Bangkok saved my life. Bangkok is a fantasy, she replied. This is real life. This is what adults do. They take care of their responsibilities. We argued for hours. Words said that couldn't be taken back, accusations and counter-accusations that laid bare years of resentment and misunderstanding. In the end, we reached a compromise that satisfied no one, but seemed like the only viable solution. I arranged for professional home care for Dad, hired a cleaner to help Mum with the house, set up systems to manage their finances remotely. It wasn't the hands-on support they wanted, but it was what I could offer without sacrificing everything I'd built in Thailand. The goodbye at Manchester Airport was harder than any I'd experienced. My parents looked so small and vulnerable, clinging to each other in the departure lounge. Part of me wanted to turn around, to choose the safe path of duty and obligation. But a larger part knew that staying would destroy something essential in me, something I might never get back. The flight to Bangkok felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. With every mile that passed beneath the plane, I felt the weight of English expectations lifting from my shoulders. This was my choice, my life, my chance at happiness. I just hoped it wasn't too late. Ploy was waiting for me at Suvarnabhumi Airport, holding a sign that said "Welcome Home" in English and Thai. When she saw me, her face broke into that same smile that had captivated me 3 years earlier, and I knew I'd made the right decision. "How is your father?" she asked as we drove through the familiar chaos of Bangkok traffic. "Better. Scared. Angry that I left. And you, how are you?" I thought about it for a moment, watching the city I'd chosen pass by outside the window. Relieved, guilty, but mostly just happy to be back. That night, as we lay in our bed in Thonglor, Ploy told me about the opportunity she'd been offered while I was away. A friend of hers was opening a restaurant in Chiang Mai and wanted Ploy to manage it. It was everything she'd dreamed of, a chance to run her own kitchen, to create something from nothing, to build a business rather than just work for someone else. But it would mean leaving Bangkok, she said, leaving this life we've built here. "When do you start?" I asked. "You're not angry? Not worried about starting over again?" I pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with Bangkok's humid air. "I followed you to Thailand. I can follow you to Chiang Mai." 6 months later, we were living in the mountains of northern Thailand, running a small restaurant that served Thai fusion food to adventurous tourists and homesick expats. The pace was slower than Bangkok, the air cleaner, the stress levels dramatically reduced. Ploy bloomed in her new role, creating dishes that combined traditional northern Thai cuisine with international influences. I found work teaching English at the local university and writing freelance articles about expat life in Southeast Asia. The pay was less than either of us had made in Bangkok, but our expenses were lower too, and more importantly, we were building something together. My parents visited us 6 months after the move, my father finally well enough to travel. I was nervous about their reaction to Ploy, to our life, to the choices I'd made. But watching them interact with her, seeing how gently she cared for Dad's dietary restrictions, how patiently she explained Thai customs to Mum, I realized that love translates across all cultural boundaries. "She's good for you," Dad said on their last night as we sat on our small balcony overlooking the mountains. "I can see it in your eyes. You're happy." "Are you disappointed in me?" I asked. "For not coming home permanently?" He was quiet for a long moment, nursing his beer and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I was," he admitted. "For a while, I thought you were being selfish, running away from your responsibilities. But seeing you here, seeing the life you've built, I think maybe you were running towards something instead of away from it. I still worry about you and Mum, about not being there if something happens." "We'll manage," he said. "We managed before you were born, we'll manage now. And knowing that you're truly happy, that's worth more to us than having you nearby and miserable." That conversation was a turning point, not just in my relationship with my parents, but in my understanding of what family really means. It's not about geographic proximity or meeting other people's expectations. It's about love, support, and wanting the best for each other, even when that best is halfway around the world. Danny visited us in Chiang Mai last month, marveling at how domestic I'd become. "Look at you," he said, watching me help Ploy prep vegetables for the evening service. "Married in all but name, running a restaurant in the mountains. Who would have thought?" "Are you happy?" he asked me later, as we shared a bottle of wine on the same balcony where I'd talked with my father. "Completely," I replied, and meant it. "No regrets? No wondering what would have happened if you'd stayed in Manchester, taken care of your parents, lived the expected life?" "None," I said. "Well, maybe one small regret." "What's that?" "I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose happiness before I was desperate enough to have no other choice." Last week, Ploy and I were married in a small ceremony at Wat Phra Singh, surrounded by the friends we'd made in Chiang Mai and joined by video call by my parents back in Manchester. She wore a traditional Thai silk dress that made her look like a princess, and I wore a barong that one of our Filipino customers had insisted on lending me. The ceremony was conducted in Thai, which I still struggle with despite 3 years of study, but the important parts needed no translation. Love, commitment, partnership, these concepts transcend language barriers. As I write this, 5 years after that first desperate flight to Bangkok, I'm sitting in our restaurant during the quiet afternoon hours between lunch and dinner service. Ploy is in the kitchen, experimenting with a new dessert recipe that combines traditional khao niao mom wong with British custard, a fusion that shouldn't work but somehow perfectly represents our relationship. The question people always ask me is whether I'd recommend this path to others, whether I think everyone should quit their job, leave their country, and follow their heart to Southeast Asia. The answer is both yes and no. No, because this level of life upheaval isn't necessary for everyone. Most people can find happiness and fulfillment without moving to the other side of the world. They can make changes within their existing framework, adjust their priorities, find adventure and meaning closer to home. But yes, absolutely yes, if you're dying inside. If you've tried everything else and you're still feeling like you're sleepwalking through life. If you found something or someone that makes you feel truly alive for the first time in years, in those cases, no risk is too great, no change too dramatic. The secret isn't about Thailand specifically, or about international relationships, or about dramatic geographic relocations. The secret is about having the courage to choose authenticity over security, growth over comfort, love over fear. 5 years ago, I was a divorced, depressed office worker in Manchester who thought his best days were behind him. Today, I'm a married restaurant owner in Chiang Mai who wakes up every morning excited about what the day might bring. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was worth every moment of uncertainty and struggle. The old Tom, the one who stayed in an unhappy marriage for years because it was easier than change, who accepted a boring job because it was safe, who lived his life according to other people's expectations, that Tom is gone. In his place is someone I actually like being, someone who takes risks and follows his heart, and isn't afraid to fail spectacularly in pursuit of something meaningful. Ploy is calling me from the kitchen. The dinner rush is about to start and she needs help with prep. In a few hours, our little restaurant will be full of people from around the world, all of them pursuing their own versions of adventure and meaning. Some will be tourists on 2-week holidays, others will be expats like us who've made Southeast Asia their permanent home. All of them will have stories, dreams, reasons for being here. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I have vegetables to chop, customers to serve, and a life to live. A real life, an authentic life. A life that I chose rather than one that was chosen for me. And every single day, I'm grateful that I was brave enough to lose everything in order to find myself.